Imagine a nation standing for 5,000 years, and in just 10 years, almost completely annihilated because someone turned off the faucet. This place was a miracle that had lived for 5,000 years, the birthplace of civilization, Mesopotamia. A world built on water, believed by some to be the very Garden of Eden named in the Bible. And this is the same place only a few years later. This was not a drought. This was not a climate disaster. This was a premeditated murder. The story of how a lush paradise at the heart of a nation was drowned by the order of a single man. This was one of Saddam Hussein's darkest crimes. He had found a way to weaponize water. This story tells how silent murders happen in history. No bombs, no missiles, only water, and just that effective. Archaeological evidence going back to 5000 BC shows that the first civilizations arose right here. The Sumerians, the Babylonians, the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia were born here. In the south of Iraq, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers meet, three vast systems lay: the Central Marshes, the Marsh Marshes, the Hawiza Marshes. In total, a 20,000 square kilometer wetland, larger than all of Belgium. Millions of reeds and rushes, labyrinthian canals, endless water-covered paths, and about 500,000 people lived here. They were the Madon people, called the Marsh Arabs, for thousands of years, since the Sumerians, a way of life unchanged for 5 millennia. At daybreak, the slender boats called mashuf would glide silently onto the water. Nets were cast, the rice fields breathed with water. The heavy steps of water buffalo echoed in the shade of the reed houses. They had houses called mudif, magnificent high-ceilinged structures built entirely from reeds. Guest rooms, cultural centers, places where families began life, lived it, and left it behind. This was not merely a habitat, it was a culture built to the rhythm of water, growing along the roots of migratory birds, carrying within it the experience of thousands of years. And this paradise was also a refuge for the world, a stopover for millions of birds migrating from Siberia to Africa, home to unique species found nowhere else, like the Basra reed warbler. But civilizations change, politics changes, and the gaze of politics had already fixed upon this paradise. 1980. Saddam Hussein entered a bloody war with Iran that would last 8 years. During this war, the marshes suddenly became a strategic place. Militarily, they were perfect, a vast labyrinth, a place tanks couldn't enter. Dissidents fled there, deserters, Iranians, people resisting Saddam. Through the war, something odd happened. The marshes were relatively preserved because both sides needed to keep water levels high. But in 1991, everything changed. The Gulf War. Saddam was driven out of Kuwait. He had been defeated. And in that moment of weakness, the Shia Arabs in the south rose up. The Marsh people rose up. An uprising began against the regime. Where did these insurgents go? The only safe place: the marshes, that vast, enigmatic, military-proof labyrinth. Saddam crushed the uprising. He crushed it with blood. But what remained in his heart was deep hatred and fear. From that moment on, the marshes, in his eyes, were no longer lands of fugitives, but the nest of the opposition. And the regime media moved at once. Articles portrayed the Madon people as monkey-faced, primitive people who were not real Iraqis. The goal was clear: to strip this community of their humanity and mark them as targets. Documents later came to light. The plan was no longer agriculture, it was revenge. And Saddam's order was simple: if you can't send troops into the marsh and defeat your enemy, then kill the marsh itself. Saddam's engineers went to work. Alongside classical military methods, they used a weapon rarely seen: water itself. The goal was simple: to capture all the water of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and divert it before it reached the marshes straight to the Persian Gulf, a canal named the Saddam River The Glory Canal, the Loyalty to the Leader Canal. Propagandistic names, embankment stretching over 70 kilometers, colossal designs. Heavy, complex engineering projects. These engineering marvels turned into a drainage system that diverted the life-giving waters of the rivers away from the marshes straight to the Gulf. The result? Immediate, apocalyptic. In just 2 months, 2/3 of the central marshes dried up. On satellite photos, that bright blue vanished. In its place, brown sand, chalk-white salt, aged earth. This was no longer a paradise, it was a hell. And who paid the first price? The Madan people. When the water withdrew, their lives withdrew. First, the fish died. Then the buffalo. The reeds withered. Those magnificent reed houses, passed down through generations for thousands of years, lost the moisture they needed to stand and collapsed. And when the water left, the army came. The remaining villages were burned. Poison was poured into the waters. People trying to flee, boats and vehicles, were fired upon by helicopters. A Madan population of 500,000 fell to only 20,000. Hundreds of thousands fled to Iran or to other parts of Iraq. 90% of a culture was erased from the map. What do you call this? Ecocide, an ecological massacre, and a crime against humanity. Mid-1990s, the situation was this: 90%, 90, of the marshes were gone. Wait a second, 40 years ago, the area had been 15 to 20,000 square kilometers. In just a few years, it fell to 2,000 square kilometers, 10 times smaller. The soil turned salty. The wind carried that salt through the air and blew it into villages. Waterways were cut, connection routes were lost. In 2002, 40,000 Madan people were still living in refugee camps in Iran, in tents, in the cold, thinking of their old homes. A way of life of 5,000 years was erased for the stage of history.
Scientists gave the numbers. The Basra reed warbler, found only here, nearly extinct. 40 to 60% of migrant birds, gone. 7 mammal species vanished entirely. The Mesopotamian wolf, the native hedgehog, all erased. The drying of California's wetlands took 50 years. Saddam destroyed the Mesopotamian Marshes in 2 years. Scientists diagnosed it the worst environmental disaster of the 20th century. The UN called it a crime against humanity. Some said genocide. But no one heard. No outcry. No court. History wrote it down and moved on. The world remained silent. When Saddam's regime fell, the Ma'aden returned, not with violence, but with life. They broke the embankments, breached the canals, opened the gates. The water returned to its old bed. That dead desert turned green again. Birds came, fish multiplied. By 2006, 58% had recovered. In 2016, UNESCO named it a World Heritage Site. 250,000 Ma'aden came home. History began again. But this story doesn't end here. The 2020s, drying again. This time, dams in Turkey, Syria, Iran. Climate change, severe droughts. What was gained is being lost. The water is salty. Buffalo are dying. Only a few thousand Ma'aden remain, living in what feels like captivity. Some experts say this could be worse than Saddam's time. 5,000 years, a civilization, erased in 30 years. Not by war, not by bombs, by cutting off water. History calls it the draining of the marshes, but the truth is simple. Hold back the water, kill the people. Quietly. No sirens, no handcuffs. This is an unfinished massacre, still drying today, because no one was fully held to account.